You see the sudden emergence of sustainability, or now ESG, just everywhere.
It's an overnight sensation, 30 years in the making is one way to think about it. Climate change is here now. It's very significant, and it creates human risk and business risk. And no business, no boardroom can afford to overlook that basic fact because of its direct impact on business.
Welcome to Sustainability Decoded with Tim
and Caitlin.
On our podcast, we break down what's happening in climate, sustainability, and ESG.
And along the way, we help you get smarter about sustainability. So let's get into it.
Get a pen and paper out because, as you'll hear me and Caitlin say several times in this episode, our guest is extremely quotable.
Trust me, you're going to want to write down everything he says. But luckily, you can just listen to our podcast a second time.
Aron Cramer is the president and CEO of management consulting company BSR.
BSR stands for Business for Social Responsibility. We talked to Aron about how he got to where he is, how BSR helps businesses advance ESG initiatives, and how ESG has evolved and exploded in popularity.
Like most of our guests, I've known Aron for a long time, and he was involved with sustainability from way before it was trendy. He's been out on the cutting edge of a lot of advancements in this space.
We're lucky to have him. Aron kicked it off by telling us about BSR's mission and his mission. Also, Aron decodes himself often, so I kind of started to worry about my job.
I started my career as a journalist at ABC News in New York, and then went to law school and practiced law for several years. I came to BSR, where I've been since 1995, with the absolutely wonderful opportunity to launch a human rights program at a time when very few businesses had an approach to human rights, let alone a structured approach. Things have changed a lot in the intervening time. So what attracted me to BSR then, and still attracts me, is the combination of practicality and idealism. So we have a vision and a mission as an organization that's really important to us, but we like to get things done. We like to see change happen. We don't write reports for the sake of reports. Our mode of operation is not so much to engineer full-page ads in the Financial Times, the New York Times, but rather help companies really put sustainability at the core of what they're all about as a business, both in terms of strategy and operations. And for me, that's a very compelling vision and really a fantastic opportunity.
I kind of wanted to touch a little bit on BSR a bit more because I'm not actually myself familiar. And I think maybe young people like me who are just entering the workforce as well might want a bit of a refresher. So BSR is a management consulting company. I was kind of hoping maybe you could explain a little bit what a management consulting company does.
Well, we do consulting, but that's not all that we are. So we're a global nonprofit business network. We have now well over 300 member companies around the world. And our mission is to work with business to create a just and sustainable world. And we've changed as an organization repeatedly through our history. Tim, you've known us for quite a long time and seen different iterations. Our mission has stayed the same throughout our history. We really do three things. So we produce insight to help companies understand the changes that are coming to business and society. We created now 4 years ago a Sustainable Futures Lab, where we do scenarios, some things that many in the ESG world will be familiar with on TCFD scenarios, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. But we also look at broader shifts, and we did one scenario that actually is playing out now in some ways, did this about 4 years ago, looking at a decoupling of the global economy with different blocks with different values emerging. And I think we are seeing some of that happen right now. So insights, number one. We do consulting, so we help companies develop strategies and have shifted from looking at sustainability strategies to thinking about resilient business strategies, because having a sustainability strategy over here and your business strategy over there, that's not really the right model. And a lot of us, including at BSR, we We advanced that thinking for a long time, but now we help companies say, well, is my business resilient, certainly with respect to climate change, but also with changing social norms? Obviously, in the United States and around the world, awareness of systemic racism and other forms of discrimination people have become more aware of it. How do you think about your business in that light? How do you think about your business in terms of changing consumer tastes, overhauling your product portfolio if you're in the food business, looking at circular models when rising generation is less interested in fast fashion and maybe more interested in, there's the sales of what used to be called secondhand clothes is skyrocketing. So do a lot of consulting with companies, both on broad strategy, but then implementing a human rights policy, a net zero policy, working to engage with the right group of stakeholders so that companies can create long-term business value that is good for all stakeholders. And then the third thing is collaborations. And we've generated dozens of collaborations over the course of our history on everything from women's empowerment, financial literacy, protection from gender-based violence in global supply chains, to decarbonizing transport and logistics, and a wide range of topics, because systemic change is really crucial. So insight to help companies understand the changes in the world, advice to create long-term value for all stakeholders, and collaborations that can create systemic change. Because the questions that we work on, that you work on, are bigger than any one company. Maybe not bigger than Persefoni. I'll exempt you from that. But bigger than any one company, any one industrial sector, and frankly, bigger than the private sector. We need collaboration to make it happen. We do all this with a team of 200 people. We're now in 11 locations in the US, Europe, and Asia. So we're proud to work around the world and bring global perspectives to our work.
That's fantastic. And you know what? We've been doing this, you and I, for double-digit years. And now all of a sudden it seems to be on every headline, every business, every sector, everybody is talking about it. And why is that? Why do you see the sudden emergence of sustainability, or now ESG, just everywhere?
Yeah, it's an overnight sensation, 30 years in the making is one way to think about it. So I think there's a lot of factors. But I think the thing that's most important, and it's important right now at a time when there's a lot of backlash against ESG or sustainability, maybe we can talk about that, but there's some fundamental facts that are undeniable. Let's start with climate. And climate change is here now. It's very significant, and it creates human risk and business risk. And no business, no boardroom can afford to overlook that basic fact because of its direct impact on business. I would say the same thing on nature and biodiversity, and whether it's fresh water, whether it's the oceans, whether it's the availability of land that can produce food that we need for sustenance. Also, the statistics are very clear that these things are being degraded at a rate that is just, literally not sustainable. So I think those are a couple of things. And on when you think about the natural environment, you can point to science and objective facts. We've breached 420 parts per million in the atmosphere of carbon for the first time in thousands of years. You can't argue that. Some people do, but you really can't. And then I think, let's look at the social side. We're going through just a massive shift in social norms, in how societies are organized, and right up to including some real challenges with respect to preserving democracy and rule of law around the world. And similarly, a situation where there's no rule of law is not good for business. It's also not good for us as citizens, but it's not good for business. The social turmoil, the lack of social cohesion, the lack of consensus, this is not good for business. So I haven't even gotten into values and all that. And of course, that's very important. But I think at a time when a lot of people are questioning sustainability or ESG, let's bring it back to the fundamentals. And I'm a basketball fan. They say ball don't lie. The facts don't lie. And it's very clear that the direction that the world is going in is not going to enable us to achieve the kinds of prosperous lives, stable business conditions and social and society's ability to thrive in the way that we all want.
I think last year you wrote about how there are several counter arguments to ESG. So I kind of wanted to ask, like, what are those counter arguments? What do opponents of ESG say that is wrong with that approach to sustainability?
Well, it's a very timely question because of the heightened attention to criticisms of ESG. We've actually been thinking a lot about it just in the last 30 days. And I think there are four things that are really important to pay attention to. One is there remains a gap between what companies are saying and the results that people see in the world. So if I'm an average person who maybe doesn't think about climate change all the time, but I watch TV and I see all these ads about what companies are doing on climate, I say, well, wait a minute, didn't I also read that climate is warming faster than we anticipated? And maybe I live in California, as I do, and our risk of wildfires is greater than ever. These things don't add up. And so, and that's something that also has come traditionally from the left politically, a challenge to sustainability. So that's number one. Number two, I think there are a lot of people who never really believed in sustainability inside business. There's been massive momentum really in the last 2 or 3 years. And I wouldn't say a silent majority, but a silent cohort of people inside business are looking for an off-ramp at times. Let's be honest about it. Not everyone in business is truly bought in. There are people who say, oh, it's just a fad, and they're looking for an off-ramp. And so sort of can take aim at that. I think number three, we've got ESG products in the financial services world. And, you know, it's unclear whether something that has an ESG label on it is really different in a meaningful way. And I think that will work itself out as we develop, more consistent standards to define ESG. Tim, you formerly led the GRI, and I'm in New York right now for the final board meeting of the Value Reporting Foundation, which will morph into the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is going to try to create some global consistency.
We've talked about these organizations in previous episodes. GRI is the Global Reporting Initiative. Aron also mentioned the Value Reporting Foundation, which is becoming a part of the International Sustainability Standards Board. The goal of all of these organizations is to create comparable reporting standards for ESG.
So those are three. Let me leave you with one more, though, and this is particularly true in the United States. ESG has become the new CRT.
CRT stands for Critical Race Theory. Here, Aron presents an analogy between ESG and the lens through which CRT is portrayed.
ESG is now being attacked from the political right, including by three people who are going to run for president, try and get the Republican nomination. Ron DeSantis, Mike Pence, and Ted Cruz, and a lot of state officials are all taking aim at ESG. And BSR, we're not a partisan organization, but I think those critiques are weaponizing arguments that don't really hold up. And why do I say it's the new CRT? It's the same kind of attacks that we've seen on critical race theory, expanding it beyond what it really is to sort of create a monster that political figures can go out and slay. And this one is troublesome because I think it means that ESG is getting dragged into the culture wars in the United States in particular. So I think those are the four critiques. I think the first three need to be taken seriously and addressed. The fourth needs to be taken seriously, even though I don't think on the merits it should be taken seriously, because there are some influential people who are trying to take ESG down a peg, if you will, trying to undermine businesses' approach to sustainability.
When we think of sustainability or of ESG, we tend to focus on the environment side and forget a little bit about the S and the G maybe, so the social and the governance side. And so I think that's a great kind of point to bring up. So as ESG gains momentum, are those things that could be overlooked or missed, or how do we kind of make sure those are as important as the E in all of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, they are overlooked at times. There's no two ways about it. And I think that's highly problematic. So every company has a core commitment to human rights. Every company has a core commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. increasingly, companies need to think about how they support smoothly functioning democracies. And it pains me to say that, but businesses are being asked to take positions, and again, particularly in the United States, on everything from a woman's right to choose, reproductive rights, to gun laws, to the sanctity of elections, to systemic racism outside the walls of business. And these are really, really important things that I think can and at times are overlooked. As I said earlier on, I joined BSR to start a human rights program. These are things that are near and dear to my heart. They are different than the environment. They are not as quantitative. They involve trade-offs. It's not always a win-win when you think about some of these social issues. Companies have to make choices. It sometimes pushes companies outside of their comfort zone. But if you want to boil sustainable business down to the question of whether the average person on the street would say company X operates fairly, is a good company or not, it's these social issues that are usually front of mind. And so in that regard, even though they may be more complicated at times, I think that this is what the average person wants to know. The last thing I'd say, an issue that doesn't get enough attention as I think it should, is income inequality. And, the third rail of executive pay, it's out of whack. Almost every society in the world is seeing an increase in income inequality. And I literally think that's not sustainable. And it's one of the reasons why people under 35 have far less faith in capitalism and the market economy than has been the case in the past. And if I'm a CEO or a board chair of a large company, that would scare the daylights out of me, because that suggests that the climate for business is going to be degraded. And the reason for it is that the average person thinks the economy is just not fair.
Let me build on your comments. BSR, Business for Social Responsibility, is, I think, the preeminent organization for bringing businesses that care about people on the planet together. And I'm not trying to shine you on here, Aron. I've known you a long time, but I first encountered BSR over 20 years ago when it was sort of a man bites dog story to get involved with sustainability related matters and work in a for-profit institution. And so, the misfits that like to do that all sort of gathered under the BSR banner. But I will say that over the years, BSR has stayed on the cutting edge of what is the practice of business and sustainability. And I think you've borne that out in several ways. We talked about standards. We can pick up on that comment. But I would like to have you explore the more recent advent of the Sustainable IPO. You and I worked on an IPO recently for Allbirds. And I know that there are several other businesses that have sort of gone through a similar path. But to me, that's almost the epitome of what we started all those years ago about business and the environment. And it was kind of a weird story, but now it couldn't be more mainstream than companies that have formed and now go public, are traded on the public markets under sustainability values. So can you comment a little bit about the SPO, the Sustainable Public Offering process, and how that works?
Yeah, it's a great example, Tim. And yes, you were part of an eminent advisory board that worked with BSR and Allbirds and the issuers and the underwriters of the issuing. And I give Allbirds a ton of credit. This is a company whose core product is designed not with sustainability as an afterthought, but as the core design principle.
Allbirds makes shoes, but the company's mission is to be a driving force in sustainability within the fashion industry. An IPO is an initial public offering on the stock market. When a company lists itself on the market, it discloses a ton of financial data to the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. An SPO, then, is a sustainable initial public offering. So, in addition to all that financial data, Allbirds made deliberate sustainability statements.
And before we get into the SPO, we'll say one of the really exciting things that I've seen over the last few years is high growth companies that want to take on sustainability from the start, not retrofit it on afterwards. And this is a big change. So we've been working with dozens of companies. We don't call them unicorns. We'll call them high growth companies companies earlier in their journey. And they're coming to us because they want to build sustainability in from the start. So Allbirds is a great example. And what they wanted to do is say, well, we've got these commitments. We think this is an asset for us. So we want to put it explicitly into our IPO. And we coordinated the process. Tim, you were part of an advisory board with about 12 members from academia, NGO community, a couple of other investors and other experts. And a set of principles were agreed, and 17, if I'm remembering correctly, that Allbirds basically attached to its IPO. And when you do that, you get into some interesting discussions with the SEC. And there was a bit of a back and forth with the SEC because they are trying to make sure that whatever is said about ESG has authenticity and integrity. And this is a model that a lot of other companies are adapting for their own use. And it's not only for companies at IPO stage, it's pre-IPO, IPO stage, and early stage companies. This is not intended to supplant the other standards that are out there that more mature companies have been using, but to create a model that makes sense for a company that's in a very early stage, high growth, and wants to send a clear and explicit signal to the marketplace that ESG is at the core of what they're trying to do. And it was a really gratifying project. And of course, there's been a lot of market gyrations since that have affected not only Allbirds, but every company. But I think over the long run, I think this will serve Allbirds very well, and we'll see it taken up by other companies also.
I just wanted to say that economically speaking, the Allbirds IPO was a massive success. I mean, I think they tripled in value in the first couple of weeks. So,
and they heard from prospective investors. Prospective investors liked the SPO principles, that the SPO framework that was created. It did attract investment capital. And, at the end of the day, that's a pretty powerful argument.
Well, and Persefoni is one of these companies you mentioned that's sort of purpose-built for a sustainability cause. And, I've been a member at 3 different companies of BSR now. I think I have frequent flyer points with BSR. And I'm going to cash in those points and bring Persefoni into BSR. That's my next move.
Terrific.
I just want to say I've got my Allbirds on right now. So I purchased Allbirds with that in mind. Like when I was looking for a new shoe, I was like, okay, well, I want one that's made out of sustainable materials. And there we go. I mean, yeah, so it's attractive on multiple levels to investors as well as customers. So I think that's great. And it's awesome to have that in the core value of the company from the start.
Aron, I know you've been to multiple Davos meetings, the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos.
By the way, Davos is in Switzerland. The World Economic Forum has been held there annually since 1971. It's a meeting of business and political leaders. The most recent Davos meeting was in May.
You saw CEOs and heads of state and all sorts of influencers coming together around a sustainability agenda when you had the specter of war and inflation and recession in the air. We still, I thought, made a lot of progress there. So I wanted to get your views coming out of the World Economic Forum. What did you observe there, and how is it going to lead us forward?
Well, I will say I first went to Davos in 2005 when there were probably 10 or fewer of us who had spent any meaningful time working on sustainable business. Now I think you'd be hard-pressed to find 10 people there who do not. So that's actually a sign of mainstreaming and progress that's incredibly valuable. And when I looked at the agenda in Davos, it looked like we've since retired the annual BSR conference, but the agenda looked not that different from the BSR conference. And so I think the agenda really has come in from out of the cold. And in Davos, not this year, but in January, it can get quite cold. So I think that's really great. Everything you mentioned, recession, Ukraine, the lingering effects, ongoing pandemic, you can say those are distractions, but actually those are, if you boil ESG down to the intersection of business and society, those are all things that are a very important part of business and its relationship with and its impact on society. Will the situation in Ukraine cause us to accelerate the shift to a clean energy economy or slow it down? Will the food crisis that's result in international cooperation that will avoid famine in some places that are at risk. Obviously, public health and health equity, the importance of that is even greater in the wake of the pandemic. And recessions hit the vulnerable more than they hit the wealthy. So all of these things, you can consider them extraneous to the ESG agenda, but they're really not, because at the end of the day, I think what at BSR, what we're here to do, and I think at Persefoni, what you're here to do is let's have business be a positive force for an economy that allows everyone to thrive within the natural boundaries of the planet. And that gets the core, again, what is the relationship between business and society? So I don't think it's a distraction. I think if I've given you a silver lining, the cloud here is it's a simple point of bandwidth right now. Every institution, certainly including businesses, including the C-suite and boardrooms, are struggling to keep up with the pure volume of fundamentally important questions. And let's remember that ESG is rising at a time when business disruption is also happening. Now, that can point in a good direction, but I think the point is that the business agenda is incredibly crowded. And so I think that's the biggest worry I have about the current situation is, can we keep up with the pace of change?
Right. I think you've mentioned before, the innovation in terms of social thinking often precedes the innovation that we can actually implement in business, right? So there's a sort of lag, a time period where we have to match the social innovation to the innovation in business. And I think as a society, we're going through quite difficult and strenuous times on people individually, on us individually, as well as business. And that can be a catalyst for, quite dramatic change, or it can make us scared and we can retreat back to the same places we were before. It's definitely a bit tricky.
One of the big challenges that I see going forward, Aron, is the notion of greenwash. And you touched on this in your opening remarks. We actually had a case where police raided the largest asset manager in Germany for greenwash claims. And we're seeing the SEC is now investigating Goldman Sachs for greenwashing. That is, selling securities that are based on ESG, some ESG attributes that turn out not to be true. I'd love your comments on this. Have we landed in sort of an accountability crisis here?
I'll take the longer term view. I think let's distinguish between greenwashing and some things that are not greenwashing but are sometimes presented as such. Greenwashing is a real issue. It's a real problem. Messages can't get too far out ahead of performance. It ultimately doesn't do anybody any good. So the advice we give to companies is don't go there, because we live in a world of massive transparency. Probably you're not going to get away with it. There's an awful lot of people who are going to test whether your stated commitments are real. So, think twice about what you're communicating, because there are instances of greenwashing. There's some TV ads that speak to reduction in carbon intensity, but in a world where we have to peak emissions by the end of this decade and start a pretty rapid decline, carbon intensity alone won't get the job done. And I don't think that's going to remain a very credible argument. So, that's one example of something that, multi-million-dollar television ad campaigns trumpeting carbon intensity. I'm not sure that's really a solid thing to do, an accurate thing to do. Now, there's another piece here, though, that I think we need to keep in mind. So we want companies to have high ambition. We know that no company's record on anything is ever going to be perfect. And so we don't want to throw the ambition baby out with the greenwashing bathwater, to torture a metaphor. There needs to be some space for high ambition, even when companies can't say when they make a commitment how they're going to get there. Let's give the example of Maersk, the world's largest shipping company. They made a commitment to net zero shipping before the middle of the century, in advance of, I think it was COP25, in advance of COP in Poland.
COP is the United Nations Climate Conference. World leaders and politicians meet during COP to discuss climate goals.
They said quite honestly, we are not sure how we're going to get there. We need to redesign ships. We need to ensure that there's a source of clean fuel. So I celebrate that. I cite their case because they've actually made more progress than they said they would. But if they had fallen a bit short, but were still heading, you'd say, cruising through the ocean in the right direction, that's not greenwashing. That's a high ambition statement on something that's complicated, takes time, takes innovation, takes investment. There are a lot of variables to get where we need to go on sustainability, and a lot of unexpected things happen. Russia and Ukraine being a great example. It's totally upended our energy system and our food system. This will have a massive impact on things. Scope 3 emissions, how do you measure that? Well, companies still aren't quite sure how to measure it. The gyrations in the market over the last couple of years have played havoc with supply chains. Therefore, Scope 3 objectives have been disrupted. So when you make a good faith effort that's high ambition and you might come up short 1 year, get where you want to go in another year, that's not greenwashing. So let's call it out when it's real, when there's an element of deception involved or claims that are so far out ahead of the realm of possibility that you can't get there, versus good faith ambition that's going to take time to achieve.
This goes back to the Davos meeting. We were both in Glasgow and Davos together. And I was at a meeting in Davos where former Secretary of State and Climate Envoy John Kerry came in. And he said that had we stayed on track to the commitments made in Glasgow just 6 months ago, we would have 1.5 degrees in sight. And that just scared me because, we were at another meeting where many commitments were being made, all great, right? Net zero commitments are wonderful. But if we're not going to meet those commitments, then what's the point? Just to get a nice sort of celebratory press release and a lot of accolades. That's what I meant about the accountability crisis, that at some point we have to start doing the hard work of implementation and really seeing how progress is being made. Granted, there's going to be ups and downs. We're certainly seeing some of that now with the fuel prices, inflation, geopolitical instability. But I would love to sort of hear your thoughts about the accountability crisis and how we solve that.
So it's got to be solved. So I thoroughly agree that we need to make sure that commitments made are commitments that are kept. I think you have to come back to public policy in some of this, because at the end of the day, governments are charged with setting and enforcing laws and regulations. And so I believe in voluntary action. I believe in the innovation that it can spark, but that can't be the only mechanism we have. We do need governments to set rules and then enforce them in a fair and even way. There also are other mechanisms. The UN, the Secretary General, has created his commission to look at this very question on corporate net zero commitments, and that will probably help as well. Transparency, something I know, Tim, you're not only a strong believer in, but a pioneer in, it also plays a role. So we don't have a world government. That's not going to happen anytime soon. So there isn't a single answer to that question, but I do think we need public policy solutions, some of the more sort of the soft governance approaches that come through collaborations like the Secretary General's commission, and then strong transparency with consistent guidelines and standards so that reporting is done in a comparable way and a credible way. The combination of those things will help get us where we need to go. But like so many things in this world, there isn't a single answer to the question.
One last question. I wanted to ask, what is one lesson your career in sustainability has taught you? It could be a big one, a little one, soft skills, hard skills, anything. Yeah.
Can I say three things? Three things that
sure.
I think are really important. So one is be curious. Really, really important. Really, really important. No one has all the answers. And so be curious, ask questions. The second is, I would say, be comfortable in the gray. Be comfortable looking at connections between issues. So be comfortable with ambiguity, because that often arises in the world of sustainability. And that's sometimes where some of the best answers are. And the third is, don't sit still. The intersection of business and society, if you think about it as an actual intersection, it's kind of chaotic. It's like the traffic lights went out and cars are driving around, and it changes all the time. So be ready to embrace change. We know today tons more than we did 5 years ago about sustainable business, but we only know a fraction of what we need to know and what we will know in 5 years.
Aron, you're just such an insightful leader in this space, and you've always been at the forefront of that intersection between business and society. And I can't thank you enough for being with us today on our podcast. You've really shined a light on many of the key issues that are facing businesses right now as we change and as sustainability crosses that threshold into the mainstream of the global economy. So thank you, Aron.
Thank you, Aron.
Well, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Caitlin. Tim, you have been and are a great leader, and Caitlin, it's great to hear your perspectives, and it's exciting to see what Persefoni is building. So, together, hopefully, we can get where we want to go. So, thanks for the chat. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. I will say also that you have some great quotes. You're highly quotable. Like, you have some awesome one-liners that are just like great.
Thank you.
That's why Aron always gets invited back to Davos with a white badge. The last Davos, he and I actually roomed together. So
we did.
Roommates.
We did. And we were better behaved than a lot of people who go to Davos. So.
It's true. I barely saw the guy because he's always in demand on every podium. So. As you can tell, like most of our guests, I've known Aron for a very long time, but I still am impressed with him. Every time I speak with him, he thinks in fully formed paragraphs and bullet points like no one I've ever met.
Yeah, I wanted to just be writing down a lot of what he was saying because they were just such great and eloquent sentences. I really enjoyed how he also focused on the social aspect, or the S in ESG. I think that is one of the aspects of ESG that is often overlooked. And so it's great to have a company out there doing that work.
He's so quotable and so relatable at the same time. And the guy's just really led quite an amazing career at the forefront of business's relationship to society, that intersection we discussed on the podcast. So I couldn't imagine a better guest for what we're trying to do with Sustainability Decoded.
That's it for this episode with Aron Cramer.
To learn more about Aron and BSR, go to bsr.org.
The link is in our show notes.
Before we go, please don't forget to subscribe to Sustainability Decoded with Tim and Caitlin on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, it would be great if you could rate and review the show. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you in our next episode.
Sustainability Decoded is produced by our incredible team at Persefoni and Hueman Group Media. If you want to learn more about Persefoni and our climate management and accounting platform, please visit our website, persefoni.com.